Thank you everyone for joining us today. Welcome to our webinar, Deepfakes and Deception. This is where we'll be taking a look at some of our annual fraud report and hopefully navigating some of the landscape of fraud or identity fraud specifically in 2023. So I am your host, Simon Horswell, Senior Fraud Expert at Onfido. And joining me today, I have Andrew and Julia. Andrew, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, excuse me. Hi, my name is Andrew Shikiar. I serve as the Executive Director and Chief Marketing Officer at FIDO Alliance. It's great to be here today. Thanks, Simon.
Good to have you. And Julia, nice to have you join the webinar this year.
Thank you, Simon. Yes, my name is Julia Dinola, and I'm a Senior Product Manager at Onfido. I've been working at Onfido for 7 years, dedicating the last 5 years to shaping and innovating our biometrics products. Really happy to be here.
Wonderful. So let's kick things off. Now, every year Onfido launches an annual fraud report. We've been doing so for about 5 years. And this is where we look over the statistics from the last year. And in this case, we're looking over the statistics from the last 5 years to see if we can find any trends or patterns in fraud. So I've got a few key headlines to start us off about the general landscape of fraud in 2023. One of the first things we noticed is that there's been an increase in document manipulation. And I'll come to explain that a little bit more. But basically, we're talking about the alteration of documents or images of documents as opposed to creating complete physical counterfeits. What we've also seen is an increase in biometric fraud, more than we'd seen any other year. Now, this is quite interesting, and it's coupled with the final headline, which is a very large increase in deepfakes and cheapfakes. Now, this is a good example of how generative AI has taken an impact on identity fraud and speaks to the increased accessibility of some of the tech that's involved. So every year we look at how fraudsters behave, and I always find this quite fascinating. So in the graph that we've got here, we are looking at how fraudsters operate, or the times that they're most active over the course of a week. So if you look at 2019, that's the gray line towards the bottom, you'll see that pre-pandemic, fraud was very much Monday to Friday. And I can tell you from looking at the figures as well, it was very much a 9 to 5 affair, which in itself was quite curious. But once we had lockdown, we started to see everything flatten out. Rather than being peak traffic during the week, we started to see more activity over the weekends. Now, this trend went even further in 2021. That's that yellow line across the top. And in 2021, what we saw was, I would suggest it's a probing or a testing, where fraudsters, and probably more professional fraudsters or more considered criminals, were looking at different systems to see if there were any weak points over the weekend. So potentially you maybe have skeleton staff on at the weekend or something similar. So there's a perception that that might be a better time to attack and the defenses might be a bit lower. Now in 2022, that's that red line. You can see that clearly those experiments proved that there was no extra gain for working on weekends. And so we go back to an even flatter line of 7 days a week, which is only continued in 2023, which is the green line. So a very flat line of activity throughout the week, and maybe a small dip at the weekends. But this is quite interesting. We say the general fraud rates have also dropped as well. Another interesting factor for me certainly is the hours in which fraud peaks. So 5 a.m. UTC is what we're calling the fraud witching hour. This is on average globally when the most fraud takes place. So you take that to whatever time zone you're viewing it from, but that's when the most activity takes place in this magic hour that's 5 a.m. UTC. It's not to say that it doesn't take place at other times, but that's definitely the peak. So what we've done here is we've taken that average fraud suspected rate and we've broken it down into different regions. And you can see it's all very much in that same kind of ballpark. So in Europe, for example, it's around 5 a.m. GMT or 6 a.m. Central European time. Globally, it's a similar kind of time, 2 a.m. In America or EMEA, it's around 6.9% of fraud taking place around 2 a.m. And in APAC, it's just a little bit later on. So we've got 10% taking place around 3 p.m. But it's interesting that fraudsters are basically, their peak traffic is all in this same kind of time period. Now, with any of these facts, if you are interested, you can find the fraud report on FIDO's latest offering. You can find that on fido.com, or you can search the Onfido fraud report. But you'll get all of these interesting insights in here. So I think this is a wonderful map as well. And you can see the fraud rates, the average fraud rates around the world. And what we're talking about here is the percentage of the traffic from these particular countries that turns out to be fraudulent. So America is 5.2% is the average fraud rate, whereas Asia, we've got as much as 9% as the average fraud rate. What we also have are the different document types that feature the most fraud. And then we have specifically the document that features the most fraud. So it's kind of made up from averages. So in America, strangely enough, the passport is the most attacked document, but it's the most attacked document type, but it's actually the Ontario driving license from Canada that sees the most fraud on any individual document. In Asia and in Europe, it's the national identity card. And then it kind of makes sense in both of those two regions that the top document would be a national identity card. So it's France in Europe, and it's the India national ID card in Asia. So quite an interesting little fact. So if we go on from there to look at documents in general, we've seen this marked change. So I called this out earlier. This is the headline fact about the change from creating physical counterfeits, which we would understand is a complete reproduction from raw materials, moving towards alteration or manipulation of an image of a document. So that would be a forgery, and that would be specifically a digital forgery. So it's a forgery that takes place on an image of a genuine document, as opposed to a physical forgery, which would be the alteration of a physical original document. So this kind of makes sense. So the blue dot that you see at the bottom represents physical counterfeits, so things made from completely raw materials. And the yellow dot at the top represents our digitally altered images of documents. And as you can see, in 2021, physical counterfeits, traditionally, they are our most attacked document type of document attack. And it was about 87.9%. But over the last couple of years, we've seen a slight decline in the physical counterfeits. And interestingly, this has been picked up by digitally altered images of documents. Now, this makes more sense than, say, the physical forgeries. The physical forgeries are when you have to physically steal a document and then alter the details. So it could be something as simple as sticking a photo on top of the original, or it could be something a bit more involved. But what we've seen is that that's really dropped. And I would suggest that that's probably because what we've seen over the last couple of years with this more revised methodology from fraudsters is a drive towards scaling up. So attacking at scale as much as possible. Now, just from a sheer logistical point of view, that makes slightly less sense if we're talking about a physical forgery, because you'd have to physically go and steal all these documents. It makes far more sense to try and obtain images from documents, and then you can alter all of them swiftly, particularly if you're using editing software, and then submit them. So this is why we started to see this swing towards digitally manipulated images of documents. If we talk about our top 10, always a nice thing to talk about every year. We talk about the top 10 documents that have been attacked. National ID cards on average have dominated the top 10. I think you can see here. We still have a few passports that are in there, but what we're seeing with the passports are documents that, while they might be quite robust in the physical world, are perceived to be a bit easier to attack in the remote identity verification realm. So the Italian passport is topping the fraud rates on the document types, with India coming a close second. But really, it's the national ID cards that are dominating the entire top 10. So we've got countries like Indonesia and India, where the national identity card isn't actually used for crossing any borders. So it doesn't necessarily have to adhere to guidelines like a passport would or a European ID card. Also, we've got ID cards from Europe on there, but we're looking at some of the older models. So again, there's a perception that these might be easier to attack because they don't have things like, in the case of the Italian ID card, a machine readable zone, or maybe because fraudsters have had these designs around for quite a long time, so they've been able to get used to them. So France national ID card, the dominant one is still the 1996 version. So I think we're looking at a degree of familiarity, and then also a perception of how strong these documents are likely to be in the remote environment, rightly or wrongly. This is one of the documents that we see from that top 10. So this is the Italian passport, and we have a genuine specimen on the left, and on the right we have a physical counterfeit. And when we say fraudsters keep it simple, well, I'll walk you through it. So with the genuine one, in the physical world, we've got a good holographic laminate across the entire document. We've got a main image and we've got a secondary image. And that secondary image is a bit fainter, so you can see background print running through it. Now, when we look at the physical counterfeit on the right, the fraudsters are keeping it as simple as possible because their plan is to do this at scale. And you may be able to see along the bottom there is a multicolored line. Now, this is supposed to be the inside cover of this particular document. So when we zoom in on this particular area and look at the corners as well, you can see that the corners and the edges are not particularly well cut. And rather than being 2 pages or an inside cover and the biodata page, we're just looking at a single sheet of paper with the inside cover, if you will, that's just been printed onto the same sheet of paper. In addition to that, if we take a look at that secondary image, you can see that there's no interaction with the background print at all. So it's like they've taken a document and they've just pasted a face on top and then printed it out. And this speaks to the scale that we're talking about. So it's trying to produce these things as quickly as possible. Now, if we take one particular document and we just look at, say, the unique document number, we did a study over an 18-month period where we looked at how fraudsters behave and interacted with one client and then how that led on to their behavior with other clients. So if I bring this graph up here, the dark circle in the middle represents client A. And then the white dot that you see just to the left of that, that represents this unique document number. Now, all the way around the outside are all of our other clients. So each segment in this circle represents another client. And what you're seeing here with these white lines, these curved white lines, is how many times this document that's been used against client A, how many times it's been reused against other clients in our portfolio. So you can see the weight of the line indicates how often or how frequently this unique document number has been used or reused against different customers. Now, what this speaks to is the fact that fraudsters will create their attack material and they won't just attack one client. They will use it several times again over over a period of several months, but against many different clients. Now, this is just one document, whereas this is one of several documents that have been reused multiple times. And again, the weight of the dot represents how frequently that particular unique document has been used against different clients. So you can see that there's really a good call here for any kind of consortium or something similar because of the amount of reuse of the same material, but against different clients. Okay, at this point, I think it'd be quite nice if I hand it over to Julia so she can tell us a bit about biometrics.
Thank you, Simon. Yes, now we want to delve into the biometrics fraud trends, and the insights that we'll be sharing come from our in-depth analysis of our customers' data, as well as keeping a close eye on market trends. So let's start with the most common type of attack vectors that today we see in our customers' data, starting from the top left, from videos or photos of faces displayed on an identity document, or videos and photos of faces displayed on a screen, as well as videos or photos of printed photos. Then we also have video on screen, where the biometric video is played on a screen, for example, a tablet or a desktop monitor. And then the fraudster uses their mobile device to capture a video of this playback. And finally, we also see users wearing 2D masks or 3D masks with eyes cut out, trying to impersonate someone else. Now, by looking at our customers' data from the past year, we can see that biometrics are still more secure than documents because they see 3 times less fraud. And similarly to documents, the majority of biometrics attacks this year are coming from the same source as the previous year, which is video on screen, that also includes deepfakes. However, this year we saw an increase in the other category, which is the one highlighted in gray in this graph, which represents injection attacks. And this is where the fraudster attempts to hijack the camera signal and replace it with a source of their choosing, in this case, a digitally altered video, like a deepfake. And in fact, as we analyzed all of our data from the past year, we've seen a 3,000% increase in deepfakes year over year. And this trend is reflected in this graph, indicating that while we only had a handful of deepfakes in our customers' data in October last year, this number has significantly increased over the past year. Now, there are different types of deepfakes, but the most common ones that we see in production are essentially 2: computer-generated images and face swap. Computer-generated images are created by generative models that have been trained to produce very realistic images of faces, like the ones that you can see on this slide. The other type of deepfake is face swap, which is the kind of manipulation that is most often associated with the term deepfake itself. And in a face swap, a person's face in an image or a video is replaced with another person's face. This can be achieved in the easiest way by doing just a simple cut and paste with tools like Photoshop, resulting though in a poor quality deepfake, which is also known as cheap fake. However, fraudsters can use more sophisticated techniques like deep learning models that can morph and blend the source face onto the target so that the results look very natural. And what's happening is that these face swaps are becoming more sophisticated, that they're very difficult to spot even by trained experts. Now, in this slide, you can see deepfake face swaps taken from our production data. And we actually just have a couple of fraudsters crafting multiple attacks in this grid. In fact, the individual on the top left, middle left, and bottom right is the same person. Similarly, the attack in the bottom left, center, and mid right are carried out by the same fraudster, while top, middle, and bottom middle are the third fraudster. And the reason why we've anonymized their faces is because these fraudsters weren't swapping their face with synthetically generated ones. They were actually face swapping using genuine faces taken from stolen document IDs, which actually takes me on to the next slide. So in this particular fraud ring, we initially saw fraudsters altering the personal details on an identity document and then deep faking the selfie photo to create a matching pair using the original holder's face. However, with time, they realized that they could cut down their production time and reduce their exposure of getting caught by using unaltered document images coming from data leaks or potentially physical theft. And now what happens is that the document is genuine, and so it wouldn't flag, but they still employ the deepfake for selfie to assume the genuine identity. And then they can scale this approach in an attempt to create multiple accounts in different genuine identities that then they can fully control. Now, on this slide, we wanted to highlight the close connection between the topic of injection attack and deepfakes. So injection attacks are one of the primary methods through which fraudsters are increasingly submitting deepfakes. So what happens is that once a fraudster crafts a deepfake, they can submit it through different attacks. For example, they can perform a video on screen attack, where, as we mentioned before, the deepfake is displayed on a monitor, and then the fraudster uses their mobile device to record a video of the deepfake displayed on a screen. Or they can perform an injection attack. And there are typically two types of injection attacks. So one is the network injection, which is the less common type, where the attacker intercepts the payload sent from the device to the backend server and replaces it with something else, like a deepfake video. The second type is camera injections, which are more commonly observed in production. And in this case, fraudsters submit deepfakes by using a virtual camera or a fake webcam, which is a software that replaces a real hardware camera, enabling the fraudster to use any source video or recording of the screen as the camera's input. And we strongly emphasize the importance of inquiring about both deepfake and injection attack prevention when engaging or evaluating an identity verification provider, to ensure that they can provide robust solutions against this type of fraud.
Lovely. Thank you, Julia. I should just point out as well, if you do have any questions throughout the course of this webinar, do feel free to put them in the chat and we will try and deal with them as and when we can. And if we have time, we'll try and catch some of them at the end as well. So do feel free to put your questions in. And I think at this point, I would like to hand it over to Andrew, if I may.
Yeah, thank you, Simon and Julia. That was super interesting. Thank you as well. So FIDO Alliance, we're very well known in the industry for, being an open industry body focused on eliminating reliance on passwords. So very focused on user authentication. But in addition to looking at authentication, we're taking a much closer look lately over the past couple of years with a newer initiative focused on identity verification and binding, including certification programs related to document authenticity. So let's dig into what we're doing in this space a little bit more. First of all, let's look at the problem statement. This is the old way of doing things. The old way, simply put, was fully susceptible to attacks. Every part of the online account lifecycle is susceptible to attacks because for too long we've been relying on knowledge-based credentialing. So not just authentication, but really at the point of enrollment. All right, so if you're relying on knowledge-based authentication, KBA, or weak remote, systems that can be easily tricked by fake documents or fake biometrics, that leads to accounts created with stolen or synthetic identities. In addition, authentication, which has been much of FIDO's focus, has also been too dependent on passwords for too long. All right, so again, knowledge-based credentialing leads to very phishable forms of authentication. The fact of the matter is we've been relying on passwords for close to 60 years now. That's insane, frankly. And which is one reason why I've been so focused on moving beyond passwords to unphishable forms of user authentication. But this dependence leads to credential phishing attacks and account takeovers, by phishing, machine in the middle attacks, credential stuffing, and other forms of highly scalable remote attacks that take advantage of, again, our dependence on knowledge-based credentials. And that leads to account recovery. And while FIDO's introduced unphishable authentication, your account recovery process and re-verification is only as sound as the first two steps together, right? So even if you have unphishable authentication, if you're relying on knowledge-based credentials for account enrollment, recovery tends to default to that. And so recovery creates a backdoor for hackers to work around unphishable authentication to prey on kind of social engineering techniques for to take over accounts in a fake recovery process. So that's the old way of doing things, and that's what we need to move beyond. So the newer way of doing things, we want to move things forward, is to leverage advanced technologies for advanced identity verification and to identify and snuff out attacks. This has several components. First and foremost, you need to have reliable and accurate document verification. All right, so as more and more of our systems and services go fully remote, the account creation process becomes absolutely critical, and having strong document verification it becomes paramount. Additionally, we need to be able to do biometric verification checks to identify spoofs, like we were just talking about earlier in this webinar. Right, so it's trying to sniff out fake photos, usage of masks, image upload manipulation, injections, things like that. We need to be able to have systems in place that identify such attacks. Thirdly, biometric systems need to have advanced reliability pad support, again, to be able to identify presentation account attack efforts, and again, stop those in its tracks. So all of these things are what we're focused on inside of FIDO Alliance, with companies like Onfido taking part. We're creating FIDO certification programs that are tested by third-party independent labs to start certifying the underlying products that are meant to be doing those things on the left-hand side of the slide. All right, so specifically, we are creating certification for, we have certification programs for biometric component certification that attest to how well a biometric component performs for judging for false accept rate, false reject rate, and pad detection. We also have a certification program for document authenticity. So for too long, service providers have been asked to just trust what their vendor is saying. So now we have an actual test to assess how well their vendor is performing document authenticity tests. Last but not least, we're adding a identity verification for selfie and face matching and liveness detection. That's in the works and coming very soon. These three programs will allow service providers to purchase products with confidence and knowing how well they will protect their companies and their assets against remote attacks. And this has really been, a little bit more about FIDO Alliance itself. Our focus since day one has been on establishing a phishing resistant foundation. So FIDO's been around for over 10 years now, and our focus since day one has been to come up with user authentication that is both easier to use and more secure than passwords and SMS OTPs. So as we advance this slide, you'll see that we're trying to find that sweet spot in the blend between usability and security. But ultimately, what FIDO is doing is creating a standards-based approach for user-friendly asymmetric public key cryptography. And asymmetric public key cryptography is quite an earful. You shouldn't have to be able to say it, let alone know what it means to use it. And that's where usability comes into play. Right? The fact of the matter is, if your authentication is too hard to use, your employees will work around it and your customers will not opt in. So it's really this blend of usability and security that FIDO is focused on for user authentication. And again, we have the same commitment now for identity verification and binding, right? So taking this possession-based approach for authentication and bringing that to identity verification as well. So FIDO Alliance, who are we? We have over 300 members worldwide. These companies here are our board of directors. I think what's interesting about this cast of companies is that it's really the right set of companies that we need to have sitting around the table to solve the password problem and start looking closer at the broader identity landscape as well. Onfido is also obviously a valued member of FIDO Alliance and been very instrumental in helping scope our DocAuth and identity verification certification programs and related efforts therein. Most recently, we've been talking a lot about passkeys. Passkeys are a newer way of implementing FIDO authentication that allows the private key and the virtual key pair to be securely synced across, say, an operating system or device cloud. What this really means for you as a user or you as a service provider is that once you have enrolled for FIDO authentications, once you've chosen to use a biometric to sign in with a key underneath it, that FIDO credential will be readily available across all your devices. Whereas in the past, you'd have to re-enroll every device for every service. With passkeys, that device can be that passkey can be readily available across all of your devices. And with this change in the way we're supporting ways of implementing FIDO with synced passkeys, in addition to our historical way of doing device-bound passkeys, what we're seeing is rapid adoption. So over the past several months, we've seen many major brands supporting passkeys. These are some of the brands that are supporting passkeys. So you see companies like Amazon, Nintendo, NTT Docomo, Dashlane, 1Password, Shopify. I mean, you see the companies here, and then Google. The animation shows Google. You know, we estimate over 10 billion user accounts have the options of using passkeys to sign in rather than passwords. We think this, you know, is really a revolutionary approach to how consumers at scale will sign in. Like I said before, we've been using passwords for 60 years. We've been focused on MFA for probably 20, 30 years. What we're doing here with passkeys is a true password replacement. So really shifting the paradigm for how users authenticate, which also shifts the paradigm for attackers, right? So no longer can you rely on trying to fish a user's credential out of their hands or out of their heads because there's no knowledge-based credential to steal. So it's very, you know, this authentication foundation is extremely strong, which when coupled with better identity verification and account creation, it really starts to thwart, you know, the vast majority of attackers, especially the kind of the lower skilled remote attackers that continue to be a plague in today's networked economy. So last but not least, you know, this is how we see things moving forward, right? So starting with enrollment. So starting with you know, strong remote identity verification systems that will detect synthetic sign-in or account creation attempts, synthetic documents, and fabricated biometrics. That leads to accounts that are created only for individuals with proven identity, right? So that's so important that when accounts are created, we know with a high degree of confidence that it is the individual who says that they say they are. Authentication, right? Getting rid of the knowledge-based dependence we've had in authentication for so long by replacing passwords with pass keys. That leads to strong security to every sign-in. And again, you know, for account recovery and verification, that's, you know, you need both of those first 2 points to be solid and strong. With this approach, they will be. So accounts will not be taken over through account recovery and other re-verification methods. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrew. That was fascinating. Really enjoyed it. I think at this point, what we've done in previous years is we kind of try and look ahead into what the landscape could hold. And you know, I think your last piece there, Andrew, was quite a good glimpse of the future and how things are starting to unfold as well. But we're going to kind of chance our arm a bit and make a couple of predictions. So I think the first prediction that we've got up is this idea that obviously AI is here to stay. I think we're all very much aware of the fact that generative AI is a very hot topic at the moment. But I think when we're talking about identity theft and identity fraud, certainly from the basis of what we've seen this year, I think we predicted for a number of years that deepfakes was going to play a significant role. And I think this is definitely proven to be this last year that deepfakes have made themselves very much known in this arena. And I think now they're here, it's only likely to increase.
I agree, Simon. Absolutely. If I can pitch in.
Of course.
Yes. So yeah, basically what's happening is that deepfake tools are becoming more user-friendly. They're also more sophisticated. They're also proliferating on the internet. And so this is really making it easier for fraudsters to craft this very convincing attack, even for the less tech-savvy ones. And that's actually what we've seen in our production data since last year. I mean, the number of deepfakes has increased significantly. Something also to consider is that the availability of the data sets used to train the deepfake models is increasing, and this is because there is so much content available on the internet. If you think about photos, videos, audio recording, just considering social media platforms. So it's very easy for fraudsters to get this data, and some of the data sets that are actually used to build these deepfake detection methods are public, so fraudsters can use them too as researchers, but fraudsters can have access to those. So it is basically a cat and mouse game between creators and detectors of deepfakes. It's really important to stay ahead of these emerging threats, but it's also very hard.
Yeah, very much so. It's I remember back when sort of the first few deepfake if you like, or face swap apps popped up on people's phones, and they were all the craze, and you saw lots of viral videos pop up. And I think, the majority of people don't realize every time you're doing that, that's another data score on there. There's a bit more learning that's taken place at the end of that. So it's it's definitely a growing problem. I think we're just going to see it increase over next year. Well, that kind of leads us on nicely to our next one, I guess. And that is the art of manipulation. So with everything advancing with tech, sometimes the simplest solution is the best one. And I think we've already seen a few fledgling attempts at that over the course of this year as well. But that's this idea that rather than going the way of tech and with AI to produce even better and better spoofs, there are going to be a growing group of people that will just go back to social engineering as a method of eliciting people's genuine details to open these fake accounts through some sort of scam or some other scheme like that. So genuine identities of people opening accounts that the fraudsters then hold.
Yeah, Simon, I mean, I think these two predictions really go hand in hand. So we've seen several examples of kind of low-tech social engineering work quite well. It's most notably, I think, this summer we saw attacks on Caesars Entertainment, MGM Resorts in Las Vegas, where these were social engineering attacks that led to major ransomware attacks. Where someone did some basic research on LinkedIn, called into the call center, and duped an IT admin into handing over credentials. And I think it shows you a couple of things. One, it shows you how well social engineering works. It shows you that the cost and the risk of using knowledge-based credentials, but also shows you, if you combine that with your first prediction with AI, that the social engineering attacks will actually grow in sophistication. So low-tech techniques, boosted by high-tech AI, will lead to more powerful social engineering. In fact, phishing is the leading form, most widely used form of social engineering. A well-designed phishing attack, right? So not your Nigerian prince thing, but like a spear phishing attack has over a 50% success rate. So not the click rate, success rate.
Yeah.
So think about usually you can spot a phishing attack if they're sloppily written or if it's a different language. But now you can actually use companions to ChatGPT like Evil GPT or things like that allow you to actually create machine generated phishing attacks that will make it virtually impossible for employees to identify those from a real message. So it's even more important than ever that we accelerate our work towards moving away from knowledge-based credentialing and account creation.
Well, I don't know, Andrew. I think with some of my colleagues, and I'm not going to name any names, but I kind of think I'd spot them because GPT would write better than some of them, to be honest.
This is true.
But what we've also seen as well already is, so in the example of Onfido's business, we've seen people coming up with various different scams where they'll take an unsuspecting person on the street, get them to let them take a picture of their identity document and then pose for the biometric component. So it's,
Wow.
there's some coercion involved sometimes, but other times it is just a social engineering scam. Like, oh, I'm shooting for a model agency. Let me just take your picture and let me take a picture of your document just so that I can catch up with you later or confirm you are who you say you are. So it's one of the things I always find fascinating, but indeed very scary about all forms of fraud is the fact that it's just people using everything that's available, but in a different use case scenario. And yeah, I think, you mentioned the Nigerian prince scam, and I think the only reason why that's become so unsuccessful now is because it's so widely known. And one of the biggest problems I think we have with any of these things is getting the message out there to people so that everyone is aware, so that everything then becomes like the Nigerian prince or the 419 scam. So, people are aware of it, then they can be better protected against it. But as you say, with all these generative AI tools that are becoming available, doing it at scale and making it more and more convincing is going to become a significant problem over the next couple of years. And that kind of leads us on nicely to prediction number 3. Which is this idea that believing what you see is going to become less and less advantageous. so we talked about how we're seeing better deep fakes and the fact this technology is going to improve, the fact that we've got more and more improvements to social engineering as well. It's this idea that we're going to have to rely much more heavily on non-visual cues. So looking at the data that's put forward, so device intelligence, for example, picking up on metadata within file strings, that kind of thing. Now, it's something that we can already employ, but I think we're going to rely on it much more heavily as the year goes on.
Yeah, I totally agree, Simon. I mean, to be honest, I think that the key is to have a multiple layer of protection, where, yes, I mean, you do have visual cues, but you also have non-visual elements that help you catch fraud. In this way, you can actually have this more robust defense, even against the most sophisticated types of attacks, like, you know, social engineering one that we just mentioned, the deep fakes. But definitely, yes, device integrity is key, because that means that you can actually track the source of the biometrics and the documents, and that usually comes with the added bonus of not adding any extra user friction.
Yeah, they're
So
passive
it's an
signals.
extra layer. Exactly, it's a passive
Yeah.
signal. It's an extra layer of protection, but it's transparent to the user. But it really helps identity providers and businesses to yeah, stay safe.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be challenging, definitely, but we will do our best. Now, I see we've already had one question come in, so we'll just do some recommendations, then we'll see if we can fit in a couple of questions. So first recommendation we would say is implement an SDK. So it doesn't matter which provider or vendor you go with, or what the solution is, but if you're employing an SDK, we've just talked about how important these passive signals from the device are going to be. If you're implementing the SDK, that's the software development kit from that particular provider, that gives them the ability to control your media at source. So the capturing device then becomes a part of the process as well. So we could, you know, make sure that the image quality is sufficient. We can verify that the device is behaving as it should and that it has all the correct bona fides as well. And I think the next one on the list is a bit of a no-brainer as well. None of these are kind of like silver bullets. I think with the predictions we've been talking about, with the recommendations we're saying here as well, no one item on its own is going to be a silver bullet or a magic potion that just removes all fraud, but everything in combination. So again, like you were saying earlier, Julie, with the layered approach. So employ repeat attribute detection. So this is something where the fraudsters, in their attempt to scale things up, will use similar information more than once. Now, that could be that they use the same name on different documents, the same identity on different documents, or just the same document number. It could be that they change the documents, but always use the same face for the biometrics. That's another attribute. And again, if we're looking at those passive signals, it could be that we've got exactly the same device or very high similarities between one device and another. So again, these are signals that you're dealing with someone that is working at scale and has attacked you multiple times. So it's really, really important you've got that repeat attribute detection in there. I think the next one we've got in here as well, Andrew, this was one that you put forward as well. This is seek a certified solution.
Yeah, I think I talked a little bit about, you know, the certification programs we have in the identity verification space, and FIDO has over 1,000 FIDO certified products for user authentication as well. In general, you know, certification helps companies unlock the power of open standards, in the sense that it gives you a fair way to assess the vendors that you're working with, but also prevents vendor lock-in and typically enables interoperability as well. All right, so one certified solution, at least a FIDO certified solution, will work with another, which ultimately helps you, again, as the purchasing company, with a forward-looking approach.
I think it's something that we are very much behind it on FIDO. So I mean, Julia, I know, has worked very hard in making sure that we get our beta level 1 and 2 when it comes to the biometric solution. And I think what we've rapidly found as well is this idea of a certified solution then becomes almost a compliance issue as well. You have lots of government regulations now in different regions that almost point or insist that the vendor that you use is certified to the required level for that region. I think the final point we've got on here as well, should, I would hope at this stage, be apparent to everybody, from, as I say, we've been probably banging this drum for a good 5 years now. But this layered approach we've talked about, the very minimum you can do if you're trying to verify someone's identity is don't just stop at the presentation of an identity document. Couple that with a biometric component as well, so that you can really make sure the person that's submitting the document is the rightful holder, or at least you can start to pick out signals that they might not be. Year on year, I think kind of previous years, it's been 5 times as much fraud for companies that only use document as their means of verification as opposed to document and biometric. And I think recently this year, even with the increase that we've seen in biometric fraud, we're still looking at 3 times more fraud attempts if you have a document only solution as opposed to document and biometrics. And as we said here, preferably video, something that's got active liveness in it. So passive liveness is great, but even better if you can top that off with active liveness, so you can get the maximum return on that. And video, as we said, 9 times more effective than just a static image when it comes to preventing fraud. Lovely. Okay, now I think we've got a few questions in. If I just scan up a little bit, let's see what's coming so far. Okay, so yeah, we've got this question. I'm a risk manager for my company. How can I find and detect deepfakes as they come into my business? How do I know which applicants are real and those that are not? Julia, how do you feel about this question?
Yeah, I can give you my insight on this one. Yeah, I mean, as we've seen in this presentation, deepfakes are becoming harder and harder to spot, even for the trained eye. And actually, what we see is that AI is better at catching deepfakes because it's been trained on a lot more data than it could happen for a human being, and AI is able to spot signals and patterns that are commonly associated with deepfakes that humans may not be able to catch. So one of my suggestions is to actually rely on biometrics, rely on identity verification providers that use artificial intelligence and that can offer this multi-layered approach that we were talking about, with things like document verification, as you were saying, Simon, liveness detection, so that you can actually really make sure that behind the camera there is a real person and not a deep fake or some other type of spoof. Face comparison, so that you ensure that that person is real and they also own the document that they provided. Device integrity, so that you can trust the source, the device. Basically, the more layers you can add, the harder it's going to be for fraudsters to break in. And yes, I believe that with the latest improvements in AI, artificial intelligence can be a great tool to basically fight deepfakes and be able to catch them.
I know we're running quite close to time. I think maybe we've got time for one more question. I think if we go with this one, this does kind of speak to what you were just talking about, Andrew, I think, and Julia, you might have some comment on this as well. So how can I assess the biometric performance of various products, systems and services for my business and customers? So I think this must have come in obviously before Andrew was talking about certification. So I think we can sum this one up quite quickly.
Yes, we have a robust certification program. So there's a biometric component certification programs that assesses biometric performance for different modalities, fingerprint, voice, face, iris. These are active programs that we have today. We actually, they scale according to industry requirements. Again, we're testing 3 key things: false accept rate, false rejection rate, and pad performance as well.
That's the presentation attack detection. So that's video of a screen or a photo of a screen. Yes. Wonderful. Lovely. Okay. If we haven't got to any of your questions, we will try and follow them up via email as well. I think maybe we've got time for one more. So this next question, we're always trying to improve our customers' experience with our brand. Do things like adding layers affect or impact their experience for non-fraudulent customers? Okay.
Yeah,
yeah, go on,
no, please
Julie.
go, Simon.
No, you crack on. That's okay.
No, this is a topic that I'm quite passionate about because it's quite close to some of the work that we've done at Onfido recently. But yeah, basically adding layers is really important because it helps catch fraud, but I think it also has to be done in a way that minimizes as much as possible the impact, the negative impact on the genuine user journey. So yeah, it's really about finding this balance between protecting customers from fraud, but at the same time providing this easy and pleasant user experience. And I don't know, this can be done in several ways. For example, yeah, we said adding layers that don't impact the user experience at all, like device integrity. But also, if you need to add layers, you can try to make the user experience as seamless as possible, trying to make the smooth transitions between layers and optimize the whole verification process. And I think also transparency is really important. Basically, letting users know why these layers are needed and also how their data is going to be used, how it's going to be stored. I think it can really help and foster cooperation.
Yeah.
Yes. So that's what I want to share.
No, I think you make a good point. To my mind, if you've got your layers right and they're integrated correctly together, then it should be a relatively seamless process for your genuine users. So your good actors should be passing through any of these layers with the minimum amount of friction. You have what's called necessary friction. So there needs to be at least a feeling that something's there, but not to the point where it becomes intrusive. I mean, we don't want sort of people having to wait like 8 minutes for something to process and clear, right? But if your layers are integrated well, then a lot of it should be seamless, multiple tasks handled at the same time, so that you end up with that quicker process that feels kind of smooth and frictionless, but at the same time is doing everything under the hood or behind the curtain to make sure that you are actually picking up on any bad actors and then necessarily obstructing them. So I think that's yeah, that's a good point to make. Okay, so a couple of points because we are pretty much at time and I am conscious of stealing everybody's time. Thank you very much for joining us today. I think it's been a very interesting webinar. Thank you very much, Julia, for your insights. And again, thank you so much, Andrew, for the piece that you've given us from FIDO there. I'm really looking forward to finding out a bit more about that, which means I could do that at FIDOalliance.org. So it's FIDOalliance.org. If you are interested in any of the points that Julia and I have made that have come from our annual fraud report, as I say, you can find that on onfido.com. That's onfido.com, or you can search the Onfido annual fraud report or identity fraud report, and you should be able to pick up a free copy of that, I would imagine. I think we'll probably put a link in the comments as well, so you can click on that and get your report from there too. But thank you very much for joining us again this year. I do like the fact we're turning this into a bit of a tradition, and maybe Andrew might be able to convince you to join us next time as well.
I'd be happy to. Thank you so much.
Well, again, thank you very much for joining us today, and thank all of you for watching and listening too. Thanks a lot.